Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Zena Hayashi, the Asperger King, and today we're gonna be watching and reacting to the video The Monster That Appears in Everyone's Dreams by Curious Archives. Let's get into it.
I want to tell you about a monster.
Oh yeah.
It's a monster you've met before, even if you don't remember the encounter. But I'm
really?
betting you've had a bad dream. Imagined a shape lurking in the night. Most of us have.
Yeah.
And there are patterns in the dark.
Nightmare paralysis.
You see him over people's shoulders. Though it's difficult to identify repeating figures in the hazy world of dreams, there is evidence that humans have been observing similar shadows for centuries, that across our collective nightmares lurks.
I have nightmares 90% of the time, but I recently got on meds that are making me not have nightmares as much now, which is good.
We
the
can't
Hat
begin
Man.
until we've said hello to the Hat Man, of course. You might have seen images of this silhouette online, a shadowy figure with a snazzy head accessory. Most claim they've glimpsed him during sleep paralysis, a well-documented condition where the body shuts down and
I've
the
never
brain
had
perceives
sleep
vivid,
paralysis
monstrous shapes.
before.
But this figure is only the most recent specter that's been haunting multiple minds. Eerily similar accounts of dream visitors stretch back thousands of years and across different cultures. These so-called shadow people, they definitely get around. The question is, what does that mean? Trying to figure out what's happening here isn't helped by the fact that the science of dreaming feels borderline mystical.
That's
we
because
know
it is
that
mystical.
We know our most vivid dreamscapes come
It's
to us
all
during rapid eye movement,
subconscious.
or REM sleep, during which our muscles freeze, our eyes spin like crazy, our brainwaves spike. But we don't know why our brains do any of this. It probably has something to do with memory encoding, and maybe processing fear and other strong emotions, but why would the brain render places or shadows that confuse and frighten us, even to the point of interrupting sleep? The silhouettes of sleep paralysis appear intrinsically linked to REM sleep, the brain immobilizing you and firing up the nightmare engine while failing to properly shut off your wakefulness. It's possible you're in effect seeing things that are supposed to be locked deep within the unconscious realm. But that hardly explains why similar shadowy figures are showing up in disconnected people's dreams. Human nightmares seem to follow patterns, disparate individuals being haunted by similar specters of fear, which suggests, well, it could suggest a range of things. Yet it's difficult to definitively answer any questions about a realm we can't access. That's precisely why we've been trying to access it.
Yeah.
Multiple studies have made early progress reconstructing what our brains actually see when processing an image.
Cool.
Experiments that may one day allow us to gaze into our dreams and finally peek behind the veil of nightmares. Imagery pulled from the mind looks hazy, dreamlike, almost AI-generated, despite many of these experiments predating modern AI. One of the major takeaways from such tests is just how effective the brain is at finding patterns. Our visual centers seem to be constantly working overtime to categorize stimuli, which is likely why it often gets things wrong. Pareidolia, for example, is the surprisingly common phenomena of seeing patterns, typically faces, in unrelated imagery, which most of the time is harmless, funny, and even fundamental to many types of art mediums. But if you make things more obscure, if you dim the lights, pareidolia starts to get unsettling. Dark shadows throw off human pattern recognizers. A shadow is a question, an implication that can warp and change in an instant, going from something ordinary to something sinister. And if the mind doesn't know what to make of what it's seeing, it often defaults to a threat, even going as far as to see dangers in the dark that aren't actually there. Then again, how can we be certain there's nothing there unless we take a closer look?
Never drive off immediately after filling your tank. What happens in those first 3 minutes is exactly why your gas disappears so fast. And automotive companies are in full panic mode, trying to stop mechanics like me from telling...
there are deeper, more revealing levels of darkness we must explore to understand the figures we've glimpsed in the static.
Into it.
If the shadowy corners of our rooms at night can conjure hazy silhouettes, true sensory deprivation seems to summon even more substantial phantoms. Experiments subjecting people to zero-light environments show us that even in the uttermost dark, the eyes perceive. When briefly exposed to the void, most subjects experience mirages, harmless swirls of light and color notably similar to hypnagogic hallucinations, mysterious geometric patterns the brain generates before going to sleep that around 80% of us will see at least once in our lives. But prolonged exposure produces far eerier visions. This is something the CIA discovered through the quite menacingly named Project X-38, a research initiative shrouded in secrecy that helped inspire numerous works of popular horror sci-fi. Project X-38 found that with enough time in the void, people started seeing other things. Floating objects, crying babies, and indeed, the silhouettes of shadowy people. While nobody saw the Hat Man, author Will Hunt writes in his book Underground that one person did see a man. A, quote, second version of himself in the room. The patient then reportedly felt himself beginning to merge with his doppelganger until he was no longer sure if he was himself or this other entity. There is always something lurking in the dark, at least according to our own minds. Deprived of stimulus, of light to cast shadow, the brain nevertheless perceives specters. Darkness-induced visions, and the eerie figures that haunt them, are a downright Lovecraftian aspect of consciousness, a fact that's easier to visualize thanks to the Google Deep Dream experiments. Markedly different from modern AI, Deep Dream was a program essentially built to hallucinate, an algorithm doomed to find patterns in images that simply weren't there. They basically gave a computer pareidolia. For humans, looking at Deep Dream's output is often unsettling, as our own visual centers are fighting to make sense of a computer's half-formed nightmares. Footage of something as benign as a frog put through Deep Dream feels eldritch, in a way few things I've seen truly are. And this is a technology whose structure is trying to mimic human visual and neural architecture, a mirror to our own imperfect nerves and neurons. So when the machine also begins dreaming of monsters, that tells us something. In an excellent video by Sarah Davis Baker on digital hallucinations, she talks about the Krungus, a creature that kept appearing in early generations of AI image models, back when this technology was still quaint instead of horrifying for a different reason. Though the Krungus is in no way an established mythological creature, different models nevertheless continued to glimpse it in the static. In the digital darkness, the machine, too, saw a phantom. But a far more terrifying figure menaced this early technology. While experimenting with negative prompts to peer behind the algorithm's architecture, Swedish writer Steph Swanson accidentally summoned the Lobe, a distorted, demonic-looking woman that would allegedly continue to appear in unrelated images. She was, according to Swanson, uncannily persistent, like a dominant gene. Such stories almost feel like the algorithmic equivalent of shadow people, patterns in the data that for some fundamental reason, these false neurons just can't stop dreaming of. So what does it mean that a rough simulacrum of our subconscious is equally menaced by inexplicable, repeating shadows? When trying to determine what layer of the mind our collective shadows might be wandering out of, there are centuries of dream theories to wade through. Carl Jung famously made the case for the collective unconscious, a universal, genetically inherited foundation to all human brains, from which our most widespread symbols come from. In the Jungian model, you don't need to have seen a depiction of a shadowy monster on TV or in a video game to have knowledge of it. The shadow has always been there, lurking in your innermost dreams. Everyone has glimpsed the shadow. Jung's model of collective archetypes is a lot, and difficult to substantiate, but it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate to have illuminating aspects. Most psychologists concur that dreams are heavily based in symbolism, and that our minds do rely on reoccurring mental archetypes. Rough maps of the connections among these symbols look an awful lot like the algorithmic architecture that powers programs like Deep Dream. Neural networks, whether born from flesh or wire, are ultimately about patterns. And somewhere within these patterns there clearly dwells a fundamental instinct for monsters.
Cool.
Looking at their prevalence across cultures, menacing figures are a near-universal obsession of the human mind, and many of these shadows look quite similar.
Yeah,
Some have
they
even
do.
theorized this widespread fixation is a kind of encoded survival strategy, that the underlying phantoms of our unconscious are essentially tools to help us rehearse for real threats.
Yeah.
One of the most widespread nightmares is being chased by a menacing figure, only surpassed by falling, and then followed by a range of other common dangers. It's a tidy explanation that we are hardwired to dream of particular shadows to help us stay prepared. It also strikes me as insufficient. The specters that haunt the edges of our consciousness don't always feel instructional. They don't even always feel imagined. While older psych models hold that all denizens of a dream are just extensions of the dreamer's personality, that like NPCs in a video game, they are simple copy-paste subroutines of the mind, there's disquieting evidence to the contrary.
Oh, really?
Writing for Psychology Today, dream researcher Dr. Patrick McNamara states that beings in dreams can act in ways that are novel and alien to the dreamer,
Yeah.
even displaying knowledge the dreamer has no conscious access to. If you're menaced by a figure in a nightmare, it doesn't have to be a figure you can understand, nor indeed even a figure you recognize. Though it's an oft-repeated myth that all faces seen in dreams are simply borrowed from faces seen in waking life, Harvard psych professor Deidre Barrett found that the dreaming brain is not limited to replaying stored photographs. It is perfectly capable of generating novel faces, recombining features, or even inventing them outright. It is
Wow.
perhaps no wonder why there are so many
Interesting.
stories of demons capable of entering the mind. The shadows of our subconscious rarely act like they're under our influence, rarely feel like they come from our memories, or even that they exist for our benefit. They feel like rogue agents, interlopers, invaders.
Yeah.
Look at this. Seriously, look. If this came out earlier, plumbers would be out of business. No matter which drain in your house.
So what if there was evidence that certain phantoms intruding on our dreamscapes were in fact not the product of our own minds, but trespassers from elsewhere? This was the implication of the website thisman.org, which claimed that hundreds of people worldwide had been visited by the same figure
I've
while
seen
dreaming,
that
and
guy
begged
before
anyone
in
with
other
information
videos
on the
about
culprit
dreams.
to come forward. 100 reports became 1,000, and the illustrations that disconnected people reportedly made looked rather similar. The idea of this man became so widespread, it likely inspired the Nicolas Cage film Dream scenario, also about a man who starts inexplicably appearing in people's dreams, and no doubt putting the image of this man into even more people's heads. The thing is, this man was an entirely fabricated hoax from marketer Andre Nutella, a total fiction. And yet,
Oh, really?
with all the exposure, all the goofy fan art published online, there indeed probably are thousands of people, if not more, who have
Yeah.
seen this man in their dreams.
I haven't seen him
It
in my
some ways
dreams.
is possible to create a figure that invades the subconscious. I'm reminded of the virality of the Hat Man, who, regardless of one's opinions on its true origin, is an undeniably online monster. The subject of shorts and memes, mostly having to do with Benadryl. Like, people supposedly see him when they take Benadryl, it's a whole thing.
Oh,
But
wow.
silliness aside, the online space has a genuine ability to transmit a figure, to spread a phantom into many more people's minds than any previously imagined network.
Yeah.
It almost is a collective unconscious. Maybe it shouldn't come as a surprise that algorithms trained on our internet data can't stop manifesting monsters. Neither can we. But then, how much is the prevalence of shadow people influenced by pop culture, and how much comes from something less explicable? It's difficult to say. Unlike this man, many reports of the Hat Man came from the pre-internet era,
Oh, wow.
but it should be acknowledged that it's not like there weren't earlier mediums which might have spread similar iconography. The famous silhouette of horror villain Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street, a figure who also invades people's dreams, by the by, does honestly look like the future Hat Man of Benadryl fame. And the idea of a menacing shadow in a hat is far older than 80s slasher films. Face-obscuring headwear has been associated with phantoms and general skullduggery since, like, the 19th century. More broadly, Hollywood has been linking shadows with danger since its inception, not just due to audiences' fear of the unknown, but also to hide shoddy early effects. I think we've been trained to associate silhouettes with monsters well beyond our natural instincts. Of course, larger shadow people legends predate Hollywood. They are foundational myths, but these specters tend to vary more than some accounts might suggest, most being culturally specific. A devil, a ghost, a horse. While the folkloric specters of the night definitely have a lot in common, they aren't exactly the same worldwide. Even if there is a sort of innate, universal shadow that dwells in the human mind, the cultural imagery one is consumed definitely fills in the details. But is that all these specters are? The shadows of culture mixing with the monster-prone engine of human consciousness? The truth is, it's easy to discuss the sociology and science of sinister visions from a distance. It's another thing to actually experience them. While just about everyone has glimpsed some spooky shadow of a bad dream, I had a hunch that diving down this particular rabbit hole might cause me personally to have some especially rough visions. I was watching my 50th or maybe 60th movie clip of a ghastly thing going bump in the night, and started to feel pretty confident my brain would, unhelpfully, cook up some similar nightmare. I decided to consider it part of my research process. If I was gonna meet the frickin' Hat Man, all to the good. I had some unanswered questions for the guy. Nights passed, and lying in anticipation, I could feel myself growing more and more familiar with the altered space that is a room cloaked in shadow. Articles I'd read on how the phantoms of sleep paralysis are simple illusions felt very far away indeed. In the end, however, I never saw the Hat Man, and I even had a whole section written about how that's just the way it goes sometimes. But then, in the absolute dead of night, I saw... Okay, I'm not sure I have the language to describe what I saw. From the dark, somewhere between sleeping and waking, came a... I suppose it looked like a spiraling wave, but it had limbs, like insect limbs. My brain was telling me it was insectoid, even though I couldn't really process why. I'm embarrassed to say I leapt out of bed, and this dark, sinister figure didn't vanish. It was sharper and larger and more distinct than ever. I screamed, and threw on a light. It was gone. Am I 90% sure this was a case of shadowy pareidolia, of illusion, of mistaken identity in the dark? Yes. I'm very confident that I psyched myself out and my brain generated this hyper-vivid phantom. Sleep-related illusions famously feel viscerally real. In the case of some visions, your brain is literally seeing them, the same way it might see an actual object.
Wow.
I know that. I was researching that fun fact when this happened. But that knowledge doesn't protect me from the 10% of my animal brain that believes there was something impossible to rationalize in that darkness, that the night goes far deeper than I could scarcely dream. One ultimately doesn't need to believe in the supernatural, to believe in the eldritch power of the subconscious. The fact that a mere glimpse of the dark, of a shadowy figure online, might be enough for your brain to manifest them is terrifying enough on its own.
Yes,
have
it is.
you seen this man? Or this man?
No.
Well, now you have. And now, they might well invade your dreams.
Oh, great.
Well, sorry about that. But also, that's
Just
part
why
of
I
the
need
human
more
experience.
nightmares.
Our very
Thanks,
cognizance
buddy.
is tied inexorably to shadow. REM sleep starts in the womb, which means you might have had your first nightmare before you ever saw the light. The purpose of our nightly visions in the dark is, in many respects, the fundamental mystery of being alive. In fact, forget dreams. We don't even know why we sleep. It's not just to save energy. Simply lying down saves a similar number of calories. Yet whatever delving into the dark of slumber offers living organisms, it's clearly essential, as animals like dolphins who can't fully doze off without drowning will sleep unihemispherically, basically splitting their brains in two just so they can access unconsciousness.
Wow,
Lots of vital
that's
brain maintenance
interesting.
seems to happen while an individual rests. But is plunging one's cognizance into the abyss truly necessary? Where do we go when we close our eyes? Unconsciousness has always been a nigh unmappable realm. Humans forget roughly 95% of their dreams,
I don't.
and can typically only recall the very last dream before waking. There is so much you've glimpsed in the deep you'll never remember. Despite all our attempts to peek behind the curtain, we really have no idea what's happening in the
remember
black
a lot of
box
my
our
dreams.
dreamscapes. For all we know, there is a collective unconscious down there, and within that network, a shadow at the root of all our shadows, a silhouette we've only glimpsed the edges of, a monster that's appeared in everyone's dreams. But whether or not one buys into some grand Jungian collective, it's undeniable that humans, collectively, dream of monsters. Spinning stories from the shadows of night is as fundamental a part of being as sleep is. It has always been true that to peer into the dark is to see things that go bump in the night. Some have even theorized this too is a lingering threat instinct, that the same reflexes that kept our ancestors wary of real dangers and the gloom beyond their fires now conjures threats in the empty corners of our rooms while we're just trying to get some shut-eye. But after a slightly too close encounter with the dark myself, I'm hesitant to rule definitively on any aspect of the murky dream realm. I think Harvard psych professor Barrett said it best when asked the true purpose of our nightly journeys into the realm of dreams. The question itself invites an overly tidy answer. We wouldn't expect a one-sentence explanation for the purpose of waking thought. If I could shine a light, illuminate in perfect clarity the specters of our collective nightmares, and reveal definitively the truth of said figures, I would. But such shadows belong to the unknown, to the obscurity of the night. We aren't
Indeed.
meant to understand everything that lurks in the murk of the unconscious. Sometimes it's wiser to keep our eyes closed. Sweet dreams! You know, after so much time exploring the night's most haunting shadows, I find myself wishing for some opposing light, for the radiance of heavenly power.
Me
and in
too.
my opinion, there is no greater modern depiction of angelic beings than the breathtaking art of the Angelarium, a project inspired by
Cool.
the thousands of named angels present across world mythologies. The Angelarium is the creation of indie artist Peter Moorbacher, who was
That's
kind enough to
cool.
sponsor this video, although I was already a big fan of the project, because it's even more than just a collection of stunning imagery. The Angelarium has
I
a
need to get
narrative,
this
a
book.
rich world complete with memorable characters, surreal locations, and bewildering structures. The saga extends across two impressive art books, the Book of Emanations and the Book of Watchers, which you can
I
get
need
a
these
full
books.
20%
I
off
want
using
them.
my code CURIOUS20 at
Oh,
checkout.
cool.
Both books feature a thrilling mix of lore details, story beats, and, of course, gorgeous full-color art of different celestial beings. But the Angelarium isn't just a book series either. The website, which is linked both on screen and in the description, also offers collectible art cards,
cool
enamel
cards.
pins, even playmats featuring full
Oh,
art
that's
of the
cool.
angels themselves, and that code, CURIOUS20, is good for 20% off anything in the store.
I have to
What I
go
love
buy
most
some
about this
stuff
indie
off
world
that
building
site
project
later.
is just how well thought out and unique each cosmic being is. Some of these designs really challenge my expectations of what an angel could look like, and yet each one still feels cohesive and cosmically formidable. Some of my favorite surreal beings include Deat, the Emptiness, Matariel, the Angel of Rain, and Yesod, the Foundation of Life. But it's honestly hard to rank the members of these pantheons. They're all so cool. I really enjoyed getting lost in this epic cosmology. This is a project I'd recommend to any fan of world building, myth, or to anyone who just wants a palate cleanser after so much discussion of spooky things that go bump in the night. Again, you can visit angelarium.shop and use my code CURIOUS20 for 20% off anything that you find there. Oh, and as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this entry, consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification.
Well, that's it for today's videos, folks. I hope we don't have nightmares because of watching these monster dream video. Please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you everyone who's already subscribed to my channel. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by Christmas. Peace out. See you in the next video. Bye.